Welcome to chapter 31 of the book of Proverbs, the last chapter. Wonderful book, a lot of good advice. To read this all the time, probably better to read a chapter of Proverbs every day than a lot of the other books of the Bible with the laws and of Moses and so forth. For us Christians, it's invaluable. We'll see here in this chapter some good instruction, as it says, and I'll read some of the Greek, and then we'll go into the chapter. E emilogi irinte ipotheu, vasileos chrimatismos, on epedavsen imitir av tu. My words have been spoken by God. Now, assuming this is Solomon, then the words that have come to Solomon have come by God. So we're reading God's word, and it says the divine answer by a king, which would give us the understanding that this was Solomon, whom his mother instructed, and his mother was Bathsheba, who his father David was king and saw her bathing on a rooftop and ended up having relations with her. She got pregnant and her husband was at war. He sent for the husband to hopefully the husband would have relations with her while he was on leave, but yet he didn't. And so David had Uriah put to death by Joab, the general, put him in the front of all the troops when they were attacking a city. And then the child was born to Bathsheba, but it died. And the second child to Bathsheba was Solomon. And later, when David was dying, they tried to put his other son Adonijah as king, but Bathsheba, Nathan the prophet, went into David and said, didn't you choose, Solomon? But yet Adonijah is proclaiming himself king, and David told him to take a donkey and take Solomon out with certain people and appoint him, announce him king, and which all happened. And then it says in verse 2, what, O child, will you give heed to? Now, the child, who is he talking about here? Well, his first child who became king of Judah was Israel at one time, the whole kingdom, 12 tribes, and then 10 of them were taken away, except for Benjamin and Judah, and his name was Rehoboam, and that was Solomon's, I believe, his first son. So what, O child, will you give heed to? But he didn't give heed to a lot of wisdom, listened to the wrong people, and God took the kingdom away from him except for the two tribes. What sayings, of God, O firstborn, to you I speak, O son? What sayings of God? What, O child of my belly? What, O child of my vows? So he's here announcing to who he's referring to, the son, first son. And then he changes in verse 3, and it says, and that gives us instructions. You should not give your wealth to women, nor your mind and livelihood for an afterthought. Well, Solomon did. He had 700 wives, something like that. Do all things with counsel, and drink wine with counsel. Now, somebody that wants to drink alcohol would use this one, along with Paul's telling Timothy to drink a little wine for his stomach's sake. And a lot of people did drink wine, still do. Nothing wrong with that. But it was also prohibited to John the Baptist, and I believe Samson, were both prohibited from drinking alcohol. So it sounds like the best thing is not to drink alcohol, but it's not forbidden, unless it was specifically forbidden to a certain person. The mighty ones are inclined to rage. Well, let them not drink wine. If you're somebody that can get angry, then you shouldn't be drinking wine, because you can do a lot of damage to yourself, your family, and other people, and especially today with automobiles and causing accidents, so forth. Lest, drinking, they should forget wisdom, and in no way are able to rightly judge the weak. So here he's forbidding the drinking, basically getting drunk, because a point apparently is for a judge, so they are not able to judge rightly. Then it says, give intoxication to the ones in distresses, and wine to drink to the ones in griefs. Now, over the years, centuries, wine and alcohol was used to give to people for intoxication if they were going into surgery. They didn't have any anesthesia like we have today, so they would give people and get them intoxicated and then operate on them, especially on ships. And drink to ones in grief. So somebody had one that's dying, something really bad was happening, they would give him a shot of whiskey or so forth to drink if he was in grief. Or at a funeral, possibly, it could be talking about here. That they should forget their poverty or their problems, and of the miseries they should not be remembered any longer. O son, open your mouth with the word of God, and judge all fairly. And Rehoboam was a king and would be a judge, so he's relating this to his son. Open your mouth and judge justly, and litigate for the needy and weak, not just for important people or rich people. Now it changes in 10 to the virtuous woman. It ends the book of Proverbs with this subject. And it begins, who shall find a vigorous wife? Someone who does things, actions. For such is more esteemed than very costly stones. Now, a wife in those days was a help to a husband, raising children and taking care of the house, so forth. And so here we see that the woman says in verse 11, the heart of her husband takes courage over her. Such a one will not be distressed by lack of good spoils. That means she's going to take care of hers, what belongs to her, family and people working for her, husband, and so forth. For she exerts energy to her husband for good. Now, this is the opposite of being selfish, of wanting things for yourself. And we see today that many women, not all, of course, but there are a certain amount of women that think of themselves, and to the point of even aborting a child when they're pregnant because it doesn't fit their lifestyle. And abortion is even almost used as birth control. Pretty terrible. But this is what it's become today. And it says, she makes her hands useful, furling wool and flax. And working with her hands. In the 50s, when I grew up, when I was young and of age to actually be married, which I didn't, but women basically pretty much didn't drive automobiles. It was quite different. And I'm 80 years old, so that would be 60 years ago. most women were housewives, although there were women that did work. Quite a few women worked, especially during the Second World War. But you can see the housewife that was given to the woman to be by the commercials of the time, of the 50s and the 40s, all about washing machines and things to make their life as a housewife easier. But also in those days, women they were working, but there were certain occupations that women weren't in that they are in today. I think of one would be bank clerks. When I was young and you go to a bank, all men were working in banks. But now I go into the banks and it's pretty much all women. In verse 14, it continues, she became as a ship trading far off, going and shopping, and she gathers together her wealth that for her taking care of the things of hers. Now, this furling and making use of her hands and so forth all changed in the 60s. And that was when the feminist movement came in. And I think one of the first notable things of the feminist movement was that women started to wear men's clothes, pants and so forth, and trying to usurp the authority of men, which pretty much happened, that to the point of women, when they were pregnant, they had the Supreme Court had the Roe versus Wade decision, which allowed women to then have abortion without any problem. Before, they could go to jail, or all kinds of bad things could happen if a woman wanted to have an abortion. So what basically happened was that the self became more important than the service that a woman was biblically shown to do or want to do. And the feminist movement of that time, of the 60s, was basically run by certain women of a certain ilk. You can look up the feminist names and who they were that brought in, to me, it was not a very good movement. Now, a lot of women think it's great. They don't have to work anymore in the home and do all these things, go out and work in stores and all sorts of things, join the army and fly airplanes, all sorts of things. And I suppose they have a good argument. I'm not saying that that's bad, but it's definitely changed, but not everywhere. And then verse 15, it says, and she rises up at nights and appoints food to the household and works to the female attendants. Now, this still happens in many other countries. Not every country had the feminist movement, which the woman has pretty much equal rights to men, but they are not in other countries, especially Muslim countries. I don't know anything about the Buddhists and the Hindus, but you can look in South America, in the Latino countries, women still take care of the land and their babies and the children and so forth. That's sort of like what was going on in the United States in the 50s is still going on in many parts of the world. And then it says, in viewing a farm, Georgion, and George comes from that, a farmer. Viewing a farm, she buys whatever food she needs, and from the fruits of her hands, she plants a possession and does basically gardening, which is a favorite thing for a lot of women still today. Girding up her loin strongly, that makes me think of Ruth going into the fields of Boaz and picking the grains and so forth, putting it in her in her, well, I don't know what she had, some type of a sack, or in her dress, carrying things. She establishes her arms for work. She tastes that it is good to work, and her lamp is not extinguished all the night. Right here, I'm sorry. She stretches out her cubits, her fingers, into the things being advantageous, and the things of her hand she sticks to the spindle, and weaving and so forth. My mother, she crocheted and knitted things, socks and bags and all sorts of things, and gave them to the hospital for people to have there that she made. And she opens wide her hands to the needy, and her wrist she stretches out to the poor, takes care of other people also. And her husband does not take thought of the things in the house whenever he passes time somewhere, goes out on business. For all the ones of hers are being clothed. Everybody's taken care of. He trusts her to do the right thing, and this is the ideal woman, of course. Not all women do that. Not all men are faithful either. And then it says in 22, a double goat's hair coat she made for her husband. I think it was doubled. It was opened up in the front. And from out of linen and purple material, garments for herself that she made. And her husband is admired at the gate whenever he should sit in the Sanhedrin with the aged of the land. And a wife would like a husband that was respected by other people. She didn't want a drunkard, somebody that they made fun of and ridiculed, but a woman would want a good husband. And the husband was important to the woman. Today, it's way different, isn't it? She makes fine linen and gives back loincloths to the Canaanites, helps people that aren't necessarily like her. And she puts on strength and beauty and is glad in the last days. And I'm guessing this is old age. She gets through and does all these things into ripe old age, like my mother, who was 90 years old, still making things for the hospital. And of her mouth she opens wisely and lawfully, says the right thing. And her charity is in her tongue. Now, that's a figure of speech. In her language, with the speaking of things that she says is charitable. The pastimes to her house are roofed. She's taking care of the house. And the grain of laziness she eats not. Figure of speech, interesting. The grain of laziness, the food of laziness she eats not. She raises up her children, and they grow rich, and her husband praises her. So have a wife like that is wonderful. Many daughters acquired riches, and many acted with ability, but you have precedence. You are elevated above all. Now, who is Solomon talking about? Is it a certain person? It might be, but I like to think it is you. A woman out there that's listening to this, that you have precedence and are elevated above all by your friends, your spouse if you're married, the people in your church admiring you because of the things that you have that are of God. Allurement is false. Just because you are able to allure men doesn't do any good, doesn't necessarily make for a good marriage, and vain beauty is not in you. So a vain beauty is nothing wrong with beautiful wife, but a vain beauty where a woman is vain and beauty is all she cares about, and then she's very disappointed when she loses it in old age, tries to make up for it by plastic surgery, all sorts of things, and the beauty, vain beauty fails, but not the wife, not the good wife. For a discerning wife is blessed, and let her praise the fear of the Lord. Fearing the Lord, all the things of God, reading the Bible. My mom read the Bible every day. See her reading the Bible. Give to her from the fruits of her lips, and let her husband be praised at the gates. The wife that Solomon would have us all to have if you're inclined to be married. The end of a wonderful book, Proverbs. Our next book is going to be Job, a book that I have sort of been, I don't like to use fearing, but apprehensive about, because it's, we'll go into it all about what it's all about. But I was apprehensive, and now I'm all excited to go into Job, because the Lord has shown me a lot of wonderful things in the book of Job. Hope you'll join us in the book of Job in our next video seminar. And until then, God bless.